If I ask you what child emotional abuse is, what comes to mind? What pictures or ideas pop into your head? Maybe a parent yelling, using harsh words, or getting inappropriately mad, but probably not much beyond that. Now, if I ask you what comes to mind when you picture physical or sexual abuse, that image is probably much clearer. Hitting, bruising, inappropriate touching, very clear lines between what is right and wrong, and obvious indicators of this abuse. This difficulty in identifying emotional abuse is a consequence of two main components. One, emotional abuse is very elusive and inherently hard to identify because there are no physical indicators of it. Identification relies almost solely on the behavioral observations by education staff or physicians, and even when these indicators are shown, it's often punished by educators or attributed to a different problem. And two, each state is left to interpret a rather broad federal definition of child abuse with little uniformity or consistency existing between the states. Currently, while all states provide definitions for physical and sexual abuse, only 33 states explicitly define childhood emotional abuse. These two factors make it so that emotional abuse is not only hard to identify, but also hard to address. So what exactly is childhood emotional abuse? Emotional abuse is a pattern of behavior that impairs a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. This can look like rejection, exploitation, manipulation, belittling, isolation, or criticizing. And despite the lack of attention paid by state legislature, emotional abuse is a very prominent public health issue and actually has more adverse outcomes than physical or sexual abuse, affecting all areas of long-term cognition and education, psychological and mental health, addiction and substance abuse, sexual health, and physical health. What I set out to research was specifically how East and Southeast Asian culture and first, second, and third generation immigrants contributed to households where emotional abuse was extremely common and even more elusive than that in other populations. Despite the variety of countries, languages, ethnicities, and social norms throughout East and Southeast Asia, there are many common values within the cultures, especially when it comes to parenting. These include familism, shame, filial piety, and gender roles. I interviewed 3 East and Southeast Asian Americans of different ages, generations, and ethnicities, and what I found were remarkably similar accounts of their experiences with abuse related to these cultural ideas. Their abuse looked like impossible expectations, criticizing, restriction of freedom, physical punishment, and guilt tripping. And what was so astonishing about these accounts was not only their similarity in abuse patterns, but how they were reflected through common cultural values, despite their differing ethnicities. In terms of filial piety, they were expected to follow their elders' orders without any question or possible sign of disrespect. Traditional views on the roles of females resulted in harsher regulations on going out, clothing options, and body image expectations. They were imposed values of traditional ladylike mannerisms in order to one day get married, take care of their children, and be a dutiful wife. And in terms of familism and shame, they were guilt-tripped into understanding that any poor performance on their part was reflective of the entire family. Family business, including abuse, stays within the family, and reporting such abuse was out of the question. Their mothers, who were also subjected to abuse and cheating by the father, remained faithful as to not tarnish her family name through divorce. Additionally, attitudes towards mental health and child abuse in Asia are extremely traditional. They are overlooked and not seen as an issue until it's a very big and obvious problem. And so immigrant parents raise their children in America similarly to how they were raised in Asia, only now with the added stress of immigration. These cultural values lead to underreporting of child abuse, and the model minority myth, in addition to the lack of sufficient research on Asian American health, results in little attention brought by school administration, physicians, and policymakers to Asian Americans suffering from emotional abuse. As Asian Americans are the fastest growing ethnic group, projected to be the nation's largest immigrant group in the next couple of decades, addressing emotional abuse within these populations in a culturally sensitive manner becomes increasingly important and relevant. So what should be done? I asked my 3 interviewees what they wish would have been done for them as a child. They listed things like having an outlet outside of their family to express their emotions and wishing their parents approached discipline differently and were able to communicate their needs and worries. Some cherished moments with their siblings where they could ease the tension through laughter and letting out bottled emotions, while others recalled how impactful it was for their parents to apologize to them years and years later. And those who are parents today recall that the most beneficial tool in stopping this intergenerational transmission of abuse was attending parenting sessions that taught them how to address discipline in a developmentally healthy way. Taking this into account and addressing this growing issue, I propose trust, a constructive approach to addressing emotional abuse in children that supports the improvement of parenting, healing of intergenerational abuse, building of community, and strengthening of parent-child relationships for first, second, and third generation East and Southeast Asian American immigrants through a culturally sensitive perspective. Endorsed and funded by local Christian churches with predominantly Asian American attendees in the greater Los Angeles region and held every week for 3 hours after Sunday church service, Trust is a program opportunity for 0 to 8-year-old children and their parents to participate in community building, family bonding, and an environment of togetherness. It offers 4 main components. 1. Individual support through therapy. Both the parents and the children have individual opportunities to visit someone they can talk to about any stressors in their life. 2. Community building through socials. Parents will bond with other parents and can share their experiences or resources they have, while children will be given time to do activities together that encourage social emotional development. 3. Positive parent-child interactions. All families participate in activities geared towards strengthening parent and child relationships, such as cooking, and are given weekly activities to do together at home before the next meeting. And lastly, resources on parenting methods and immigration. Parents will be given resources on child development and immigration support in navigating anything they are struggling with, such as finances or their child's education. Trust overcomes hurdles in identifying emotional abuse by being offered to anyone in the community. It is culturally sensitive by being held through the church, a trusted institution among Asian American communities, rather than taking out families individually to address abuse, where they may feel targeted, unsafe, or isolated. Rather than ridiculing cultural practices through which abuse may arise, trust promotes expressing culture in a healthy way that also promotes child development. And lastly, it helps parents acknowledge the difficulties of parenting and immigration by teaching them foundations of child development, federal resources, and supporting their own mental health while giving children an outlet to express their emotions and make new friends. Directed and facilitated by trusted community members with a background in child development and social welfare, Trust's ultimate goal is to strengthen parent-child relationships and encourage open communication and support within the community. Despite the fact that emotional abuse is elusive and arguably the hardest form of abuse to address, Trust is targeted to supporting East and Southeast Asian American immigrant families where emotional abuse might be the most underreported and researched. Emotional abuse is a huge global public health issue, and by addressing one community at a time, we can bring awareness to this overlooked yet extremely prominent form of abuse. Thank you.